was going to film outside today, but a wind has got up. It's just too windy. The audio equipment is not particularly great. So I'm going to head indoors into the caravan. Whoops. How you doing? So this is my second video blog. Since I did the last one about 10 days ago, the world has gone insane. I'm not often lost for words, but I think what we're seeing right now is just pure insanity. I mean, we've got people rioting across the United States. We've got people in England bowing down in the street, dressing up as slaves, telling one another that they're not worthy purely because of the colour of their skin. What's going on? Now, I think this has all got to do with the media. The media are to blame for most of this. And the reason they're to blame is because they're trying to whip up a storm. That's what the media do. They try and whip up a storm. And what we're seeing right now is totally off the scale. I've never seen anything like it before in my life, and I think it's only going to get worse. I mean, we've seen it over the last year. To start off with, we had Extinction Rebellion, a fake grassroots so-called rebellion that just happened to coincide with a number of corporate aims for basically making sure that the bottom 95% of people in this country and others somehow voluntarily give up all of their comforts and their way of life. Start of the year, this year, 2020, we saw Australian wildfires, which were very bad, but there were not much more bad than other years, and yet we were led to believe that the whole planet was burning. Then that quickly moved on to, well, what was it next? We've had a complete outrage about one thing or another, and then this latest thing, the riots in America, kicked off by the brutal treatment and death of a man at the hands of the police, has been whipped up into a storm the likes of which we haven't seen for many, many years. And when I say that we should blame the media, I mean it. The media is pretty much controlled by powerful interests there's very little in the way of news anymore. I was just talking to a friend yesterday, and we both agreed that if you open a site like The Guardian, all you're going to see is opinion. There's very little news. I mean, they would have you believe that since this COVID-19 so-called epidemic started, that there hasn't really been any news. There's been no ships sinking, planes crashing, terrorism, volcanoes erupting, hardly anything. It's just all been about COVID-19. And as a result, people are very, very fearful. And that really is what they're trying to do. They're trying to make us all very, very fearful. I'm going to say why you shouldn't stand for it. Just had to stop a moment there because the dog was going crazy, chasing a squirrel. So where was I? I was talking about the media, and you might hear him barking in the background, sorry about that. Now, let me tell you a story, just to illustrate the way that the media works and how they generate outrage. I mean, I know about this because I used to be in the media. I used to be a journalist, and I used to be an editor. I was only an editor at a small newspaper in Denmark, but I got to see how the whole thing worked. And while I was doing that, I was also a correspondent for the Guardian newspaper. Now this was about 10 years ago, and 10 years ago the Guardian was not as bad as it is today. As a matter of fact, it used to be quite a good newspaper. It was one of the better ones, to be honest. But in the meantime, it's been taken over by idealistic types, and the editorial policy is completely controlled. But anyhow, 10 years ago, it wasn't as bad, but it was still bad. And let me give you a little story here, a little anecdote, quite an amusing one. It just illustrates how they work. So I was working as a correspondent for Scandinavia. I was living in Denmark, and occasionally I would go into a small shop in the middle of town where they sold English food products. I didn't often go in there, maybe a couple of times a year. But I went in there one day and I bought a couple of things, and I noticed on the desk that there was a little sign that said, "Please sign our petition to get Marmite made legal again." So I said, what's that? And the lady in the shop, she said, "Oh, didn't you know Marmite's been made illegal in Denmark?" I was like, what? So for those of you who don't know, Marmite is a British spread that you put on toast and things like that. It's made from yeast extract. It's very strong in its flavour. It's black tarry substance. And they say you either love it or you hate it. I'm one of those people that loves it, so I was a bit put out by this. I said, why on earth would they make it illegal? And she said, oh, it's something to do with the fact that it's got like fortified vitamins, and they've banned fortified foods. I was like, oh, okay. So anyhow, I went away thinking about this. And the Guardian, back then, they wanted to get an article from me every couple of weeks, just so that they could have their Scandinavia section, you know, filled with something. So I thought, oh, this might make a good little story. So I wrote off an email and I said, oh, did you know that Marmite's been banned in Denmark? And I thought that they would probably be like, yeah, so what? That's not a story, go and find something else. But in actual fact, they got back to me almost immediately and asked me to check it out. So I did a little bit of research and I found out that Marmite and a few other products had indeed been banned, and that these agents had gone into the English shop, which I think was the only place in Denmark that sold Marmite, and taken it all off the shelves and confiscated it. So anyhow, the Guardian got back to me immediately. Said, well, you know, tell us more about this story. And I was like, okay. I said, I'll give it a day or two. And they were like, no, It's got to be now. I was like, really? So I did a little story on it, sent it off to them, about, I don't know, 300-400 words. And then they got back to me and they said, you must get a quote from from one of the ministers. I was like, really? So I contacted the Danish Agricultural Food Safety Department and told them what it was about and asked if I could have a quote. And they said, what? Don't be stupid, like this is a minor matter. The minister is in a meeting, she'll get back to you tomorrow. So I went back to the Guardian and I said, well, sorry, they're busy. And they came back to me and they said, no, we need a quote now. And then, before I knew it, the phone was ringing and it was the deputy editor of the Guardian. He said, this sounds like a very important story. I was like, really? So I got back onto the ministry and they still refused to give me a quote. They said it was unimportant, they'd never heard of Marmite, they didn't know what I was talking about. So I went back to the Guardian and I said, they're refusing to give us a quote. So the Guardian said, well, we're going to run this story on our website in 1 hour. He said, and currently we've got a story about Obama meeting the Queen, and we want to replace that as our main story with the Marmite story. I was like, what? Marmite? It's just a spread. They said, you sure your facts are right? I was like, yeah, no problem with that. They went, right, we're going to run with it. And I thought this was very weird. But within an hour or two, the news story was the main news story on the front page of the Guardian. And within 2 hours, my phone was ringing, and it was other newspapers. I don't know where they got my number from, but they all wanted quotes, and they all wanted to run the same story about Marmite. So I spoke to a few of them, and to cut a long story short, all hell broke loose. It became the biggest trending news story in Britain, and even like in other countries that don't even have Marmite. And before that evening was out, I had phone calls from lawyers, from angry tradespeople, from other journalists in Denmark. In Denmark, the journalists didn't even know how to say Marmite. They called it Marmite. And within a day, it was like a huge story. And the Sun managed to outrage its readers over this. And they hired a skip and placed it outside the Danish embassy in London. And people were encouraged to go down there and throw anything that they could find that was Danish into the skip. So people were going down there throwing Lego in it and bacon and things like that. In the meantime, I'd turned my phone off because I was getting literally dozens of calls, emails. I got some very irate emails, people accusing me of lying and being a shill and being this, that and the other. So I kind of went into hiding. Eventually, within a week, it was discussed in the Danish Parliament. It caused a trade issue, a potential trade issue anyway, between the two countries. And the Danish ambassador to London had to give a speech reassuring everyone that it hadn't actually been banned, it had just fallen foul of some law. Within about a week or two, it died down again, and I could show my face. But bizarre as that seems, I couldn't for the life of me figure out why they'd made such a big deal about it. And it's only in retrospect now, having seen the way the Guardian has gone, that I think that they just wanted to make an example of a product that is British, like a kind of a famous British brand, and sort of run this kind of scare story about how civilized, progressive nations like Denmark don't approve of such like horrible working class foodstuffs that we eat in Britain. So, although it's a very silly example, it is nevertheless an example of how the media whips things up, creates a storm in a teacup. And that's what we're seeing at the moment. Everywhere we look, everything has become politicised. Everything is either you love it or you hate it, like the Marmite marketing slogan. And there's no middle ground anymore for sane people, because most people are somewhere in the middle. Most people don't love or hate Marmite. 80% of them don't really care. And it's the same with this thing, like these riots in America. We're being told now that we're all racists, and if you're not actively going out and putting a stop to this by putting a black square on your Facebook profile, then you indeed are helping racists. There's no middle ground anymore. Just on my way here today, I turn on the radio. I try and avoid the radio. I try and avoid most broadcast media these days. And I just caught a snippet. It said the shocking rise in white supremacy in America has triggered the riots. I thought, a shocking rise in white supremacy? I don't believe that for a moment. I mean, most people are not white supremacists. I don't think there's hardly... You probably couldn't fill a church hall with a number of white supremacists. So again, they're whipping it up, and everybody has to have a position, one way or the other. And everybody who is susceptible to this sort of manipulation is losing their collective mind over it. I saw a friend the day before yesterday put on Facebook that he was looking in the mirror and was disgusted with his skin colour. Okay. And then last night, a woman I know, she told everyone to go out into the street at 7 PM and bend down on their knee to show how non-racist they were. And then she said at the same time we should be playing this song. I don't know which song it was some song by a black artist in America. Said that they should all blast it out of the windows of their homes. And then at about 20 past 7 she did another update and said, well, I was the only one in my street doing this, so everyone else must be racist or complicit in racism. And then within another 20 minutes she put on very, very disturbing images of a black child being electrocuted on an electric chair. And then she said, this is what white people do. So, there's another person blocked. I think what we're seeing though is extreme manipulation. And what's the reason for this manipulation? The reason is because they don't want Trump to win the election in November. I can't see any other reason. I mean, it's a culture war. Electronic media, social media has allowed this to proliferate and spread. So now that they're able to get access to everybody's minds, very, very simply, manipulate them through their emotions. And I can't see it getting any better until this is all burnt out, and that will probably be in November or December, and then it'll probably move on to another stage. So what can we do about it? I think the best policy is just to ignore it. There's nothing you can do to get rid of these invisible bogeymen like supposed white supremacy and supposed COVID-19 pandemic, which kills like 6 people in every million or something. But there's plenty you can do to stop yourself being afraid of it. I mean, the first thing you can do is get rid of your television. Switch it off. Don't listen to any standardized traditional media. Secondly, be very choosy in what alternative media you look at. Because although there's a lot of good stuff out there, a lot of it is just reacting to the craziness on the mainstream media. You know, 2 wrongs don't make a right. But most importantly, I think that you've actually got to fill the void with something positive. Don't play their game. Refuse to be afraid. And do something creative with your own life. I mean, you'll notice that the happiest people now are the ones that are creative. They have something to do, a reason for being. I think there's a kind of a nihilistic cultural void in our societies right now, and the media and the powers that be, driven by globalists, I would add, are using that to get people to do what they want. And I say, don't fill that hole with garbage that's manipulating you. Fill it with something useful. Be a decent person. Do something creative, whether it's like writing or art or growing a garden or just, engaging with your children or something like that. Be positive. Rewrite the future, your future, and don't get sucked into this void. I mean, I saw a brilliant quote this morning from William Blake. Stuart put it on Facebook, and I'm going to read it out right now. So this is William Blake, the English mystic and poet. I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create. And that's what we've all got to do now. We've got to create our own alternative future. We don't want to be part of their new normal, where people are not allowed to talk to one another, or stand next to one another in the pub, or sit socially distanced from one another in restaurants. We don't want part of that. We don't have a huge, dangerous pandemic. It's not Ebola. It's something relatively very mild, akin to the flu. We don't want to be part of this new normal. We want to create our own future for ourselves and nobody else.